Jamie Alter, and I'm doing what I like to do. I'm talking cricket. And today I'm talking cricket with a man who, like me, also likes to talk cricket, likes to write cricket, and also, this will be a different video, likes to talk about Hindi movies. So I'm sure with our guest today, let's get into it. Arnab Ray, novelist, blogger, podcaster, cricket tragic. What all do you do and how do you find time to do it?
I hope my employers are not watching when I divulge my secret of how I make this time. But I guess I'm able to make this time because I'm very passionate about this. This is my passion, both cricket and as well as Hindi movies. And sometimes there's not much difference between the two.
There's not.
There's not. And some games we all know have been scripted too. So there's really not much difference. So that's it. So I'm very passionate about this, and I try to follow both. I follow Hindi movies comparatively less now than I used to, but cricket I follow it at the same cadence.
Yeah, so Arnab, I know how much you love cricket, and you found a way to weave it into your blogs and podcasts. We have to talk about obviously India, England, but just going back a bit to India, Australia. You wrote two very moving, like a fan piece, but very well crafted. Sydney, and then of course Brisbane. And like you talked about, like I've talked about, we've all of us who follow Indian cricket closely, 36 all out, Sydney, the Gabba, unreal. Do you think it's a once, like 36 all out, would the Gabba be a once in a generation achievement, or are we on to something with this Indian team?
We are onto something with this Indian team. I was very pleasantly surprised because I belong to the generation where we have seen India go into a test match series in South Africa and Australia and just be blown away in the first test. I mean, 36 all out is a little bit extreme, but I've seen there's not much difference between 36 all out and let's say 112 all out. And I've seen many 112 all outs in my life. And it's usually India gets down and, you have people who have never faced a moving ball in such conditions being thrown right into, like, they come in at like 10 runs, 3 wickets down, and they're asked to play a marauding Brett Lee. And what I was really surprised, and pleasantly so, and I'm at that age when I always feel that the past was better and the present is terrible, and everything's gone downhill. But I'll make an exception. Yes, I'll make an exception here, and I'll say I was pleasantly surprised at the way India fought back. I mean, it's very difficult psychologically to come back from being all out for 36. There's something about being all out for 36, and I know because once I got 37 out of 100 in maths, and I know how long it took me to come back from that. So that 30s number, I get it. It resonates a lot with me. So it's very, very surprised. It's not just a question of winning. I mean, winning, after having followed the game for close to 30 years now, even more than that, ultimately wins and losses, it becomes a continuum. I mean, yeah, you win some, you lose some, and ultimately you can't remember. You have to go and look at Cricinfo and exactly look at what the scorecard was in order to appear knowledgeable. But there are only very few games which kind of stand out, and you don't need to look, you don't need to Google the scorecard anymore. And this was one of them. It's because it's 36 all out. And the fact that India were able to, without Virat Kohli, was able to fight back with a new leader, and honestly, a leader who has his own issues with batting. I mean, Ajinkya Rahane isn't, I would say, a shoe-in into the Indian batting lineup in the test side. I mean, definitely not in the one days. In his career is kind of on a downward slope, I believe, at this point of time. So I was very skeptical that, how would Ajinkya Rahane, who can barely get into his T20 side in Delhi, he's like a second choice in the Delhi side. You're making him the captain, and he has his own issues. He has his own career. How is the team going to react to somebody who's a super achiever like Kohli going from there to somebody like Ajinkya Rahane? And I was pleasantly surprised at the way the entire Indian side fought back with so many injuries on top of that.
Exactly, because every match, I mean, look, the team knew that Kohli was going, the best batsman, their captain. I mean, that every match they lost key personnel. I was talking to Gautam Bhimani, who again like us, he falls in that same bracket, and he's seen so much. I asked him, I said, Gautam, was the skeptic in you coming out, in Sydney? Nahi, up to gay, or like even in Brisbane, and he slow down. A draw is enough. A draw is enough. Did you? Because I can sense that we have a lot in common when we talk about certain matches, certain scorecards. Did you also have that skeptic in you rising? Nahi, 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 draw ke liye khelo.
See, I have seen many India fourth innings, where I've seen Rahul Dravid and all of these guys actually playing for a draw and losing. So what used to happen, I remember, and there are countless examples of you're chasing like 350 or 400, and Sachin and Rahul Dravid would just come in and they would close shop. So they would play out the first 2 hours, and then around tea, when the roller starts, the effect of the roller starts going away, suddenly one person would be out, and that's it, and that would be the end of it.
Absolutely.
Then the field would come in. You would see that there's no runs on the board because they've just scored basically 50 runs, and the game's gone. And then by the time tea comes, it's usually Javagal Srinath is batting, and that's the end. And so that's why I'm always scared when India goes for a draw. That's why seeing Rishabh Pant, seeing them continuously staying in the hunt, and that's so important psychologically, because I honestly feel that when you're batting in a test match, if you rule out, and that's why when you have chasing 500 runs or 475 runs, and when you take the winning out, that's why the side usually collapses. Because if you know that there is no winning, it's often very difficult to draw a game. It's very difficult to draw a game if you can't win. I think it's a psychological thing.
Yeah. And of course, we've seen the lows of 81 all out in so many matches where the target was, South Africa target was 214, and then you lose by 27, 28 runs. So for me, it was just all that, like, no, this can't be possible. But what it's done, of course, is it has given, fans like us who watched the game for, like you said, nearly 30 years, hope that again, now those days are gone. And this is a team that believes. We obviously have to talk about now India, England. It was sort of a come down from the high of Australia and Brisbane for the Indian team to go and lose the first test in Chennai. I think a lot of people sort of underestimated what England could do, just because this was the India which had not lost 15 test matches at home. It was coming off this incredible historic test win. The pitch has been the talking point for the last, it seems like a year, but it's actually hardly been 2 weeks. How much do you read into this talk of this pitch being poor for the second match and all the stuff that's being said?
Well, before we come to that, there's one important thing that the Indian fan has to understand, is that when your side starts doing well in a country like Australia, then that automatically means that they will start doing less well in India. It's very difficult for when you're batting, especially, it's so much of instinct that it's virtually impossible. Only very few batsmen can basically alternate and be equally effective in Australia as well as there in India. It never happens. It doesn't happen to the Australian great batsmen either. So in the 1990s, we had a series of batsmen like, let's say, Mohammad Azharuddin. Let's take his example. He was virtually, you couldn't dismiss him on a Cuttack pitch. You couldn't get him out. Mm-hmm. But the moment he would go to any place where the ball would be bouncing a little bit, he would basically leave the stumps and move away, because he just couldn't handle that line. Repeatedly, I've seen Mohammad Azharuddin. Once he went to the West Indies. This was the series in which I think Sanjay Manjrekar scored a double century, where Azharuddin was actually leaving the crease and leaving the stumps and trying to hit like a T20 shot, because he was basically scared of the ball. And so this is going to happen as we become better in Australia, hopefully in New Zealand. I think the biggest test for India is New Zealand series. I think we've always been pathetic in New Zealand. So I'm going to truly exult once we win something in New Zealand. But since we already defeated them in Australia once before this. But so as Indian fans, we have to also understand that we will become less. The India will become a less of a fort than it used to be in the 90s. Where in the 90s you couldn't believe, this would never happen, that with Rajesh Chauhan and Venkatapati Raju, you could even lose a game in India. You just couldn't. But now this will happen. Coming back to the question of the fairness, I mean, I think the point has been made by, Sunil Gavaskar made the point that for me, the test match, the notion of a test match versus The biggest reason why the word test exists in a test match is because it's exactly like your joint entrance exams. It's supposed to be difficult. I
Yep.
mean, the
Yep.
reason in the West Bengal joint entrance exam, we had to answer 200 maths. It was 200 points in 3 hours. And there was a reason why it was 200 points in 3 hours. It was not expected that you do 200 in 3 hours. What was being tested was how can you prioritize? Given something which you obviously physically cannot do within 3 hours, how do you react to it? So that's what's being tested. It's not so much your knowledge of maths. You can't test the knowledge of maths in 3 hours. You're basically seeing how can you stand up to pressure. That's what a test match is. It's about pressure. That's what makes it so fascinating. If you don't get that, it's not a question of how many runs are being scored. Not a lot of runs are being scored. I mean, if you look at Cheteshwar Pujara, I understand why it's boring, because he's not doing anything. But he's soaking in the pressure. If you look at it from, how much pressure can this guy take? He's just soaking in the pressure, and this doesn't show on his face. He's just playing for that pressure. So he's playing a test match. That's why he doesn't have an IPL team. He cannot play that game. And that's what's important in a test match. That's why the word test is so important. And batsmen have to get tested. So yes, when we go to Australia, when we go to England, and when we go to New Zealand, Indian batsmen get tested. They get tested on questions that they really, really don't know. And when touring teams come here, they should expect the exact same thing. Now, there is a notion of an unfair pitch. For me, an unfair pitch is basically a pitch which has uneven bounce. Because when you have an uneven bounce, and this Chennai didn't have an uneven bounce.
Exactly.
Even at the end when Moeen Ali was was doing his IPL auditions, at that point of time, the ball was coming onto the bat even on the fifth day. It was not uneven bounce. It's the problem is when one delivery comes out and hits you here, and the next delivery shoots down and hits you on the heel. Because at that point of time, it's not cricket anymore. It's basically somebody playing die, and anything can happen. That's a bad pitch. But other than that, a spinning pitch is not a spinning pitch, which is consistently spinning with consistent bounce, isn't a bad pitch.
And that's exactly, and I'm very glad you've raised this in a very sensible manner, because this is exactly what we saw across almost 3.5 days of this match. And this is what Joe Root said yesterday when he was asked. Of course, I get why the presenter had to bring in the pitch factor, because it's been a talking point largely from the England and Australian side. But he said the pitch became challenging from day 2. Whereas in day 1, if you were following certain people on Twitter and behind the mic, they were saying this is shameful, the ball shouldn't be turning that much. But it was consistent. And as soon as this talk of poor pitches came up, obviously the mind wanders. People like you and me who follow cricket a lot more closely than others can obviously think of matches where the ICC has given a certain pitch a poor ranking. While we're going to wait to see what happens here, I don't think it's going to happen because it was consistent. And exactly like you said, it is a test. When Asian teams go overseas, you go to England, you're tested by the swinging conditions, Anderson, Broad. At times, they'll play four seam and swing bowlers. It's exactly what happens. And I think the last time we saw a pitch which was, in fact, let's say a minefield or treacherous was Johannesburg 2018. That was a dangerous pitch. You had Vernon Philander getting some balls to sit up, some to come to the knee rolls. This, exactly like you said, and I'm very glad you brought it up, was not in that category. Is there, though, all this said, there is a certain art to knowing how to operate on these tracks. And like Kohli and Joe Root said, India beat them in possibly every department. Perhaps I think Ollie Pope's catching at short leg and Ben Stokes keeping the spinners was probably the only area where England did better. But it's an art to know. Akshar Patel and Ashwin did so well on this track. By track, I mean tracks where the ball is spinning like this. You need to know what to do. And this is where India spinners just beat England's, right?
Yes. One thing that I did notice was in the first test, Indian batsmen were not sweeping. And Joe Root was. Now, for people of my generation, Indian spinners, England, and sweeping, if you put these 3 words together, it reminds you of a certain game in 1987, the World Cup semi-final, when we were supposed to win the game. Our current coach was then playing, and there was Maninder Singh, and Graham Gooch basically swept. They thought that this was a spinning track in Bombay. The expectation was England was going to roll over because it was a spinning track. We had 2 spinners. I mean, who in England would play spin? And then Graham Gooch just suddenly brought out sweeps, and Maninder Singh and Ravi Shastri couldn't adjust their line. Wherever they bowled, he just swept, and there was nothing that India could do. And of course, it came back to hit them because in the final they tried the sweep the other way when Gatting tried to play a reverse sweep,
Exactly.
and they lost the game because of that. But so when I saw Joe Root sweeping, I kept on thinking of that I've seen this before.
Yeah.
And by the way, that England team in 1985 that came and toured and beat India. This was when Kapil Dev got dropped. That was a very exciting series.
Yeah.
And that was a fairly good England team in terms of how well they played spin. For instance, I mean, Gatting was a pretty good player of spin actually. But coming back to this, in the second test, at least I could see that a lot of Indian batsmen had practiced the sweep. So, I mean, Rohit Sharma is not a natural sweeper of the ball. The best sweeper that I can think of was Sachin Tendulkar. He could sweep very well. Yeah. But neither is Kohli a natural sweeper, nor is Rohit Sharma a natural sweeper. Even Ashwin was sweeping. So they saw that. They took the 7 days to adapt to these conditions. And of course, it's not that they don't know how to sweep. They just don't play that shot that much. Correct. So I love the fact that Indians were adapting, they were changing the games, and people who were even people at the top of their games, like Kohli and Rohit Sharma, even they were changing the games. They were accepting the fact that they needed to do better. And that's very encouraging.
Now we have the bandwagon shifts to Ahmedabad, which is a new track and a newish stadium. Day-night test match. A lot has been said about why Anderson was rested. Yes, England have this rotation policy, but Anderson, he doesn't play white ball cricket for you. Why are you resting him? You saw Bumrah rested. What kind of bowling attacks do you see these teams playing? Moeen Ali is now gone back. Do you think they go back?
He chose to go back.
Exactly. There's some gray areas there as well.
So I don't know what the new Ahmedabad pitch is like, but the moment the word Ahmedabad comes up, I think of the 1983 India-West Indies game in Ahmedabad. This was the game in which Kapil Dev took 9 wickets for 83 runs.
Yeah.
And the pitch was a strange pitch. In the strange pitch, as in that it had uneven bounce, and India couldn't play Wayne Daniel. I mean, forget the other West Indian pace bowlers. And I think they were lost by an innings. So I always think of when Kapil Dev took 9 wickets because the reason why he took 9 wickets was because there was no other bowler. The only person who could get India was him. So all of them fell to him. It was just an eventuality rather than him getting the wickets. But coming back to this, I don't know how it is. I remember there was this India-Bangladesh test which was played under lights. So there was definitely a lot of pace.
Yep.
On that, I read today that Shami is coming back. So that would be good. That would be really good. I think more than Ishant. I don't know which 3 they will play. I'm guessing it will be, if all of them are fit, it will be Bumrah, Shami, and Ishant. I guess
you assume that. Yeah.
It will be interesting to see what India does. Now, I honestly feel also that if this was the 1990s, I would be very worried for India on a fast track in India, because I always used to be scared for them when they used to play in Mohali, which is a venue they would normally lose, because it was the only Indian ground which usually had so the one that most closely resembled an Australian ground. I would say. Yep. But now the Indian side, I sometimes am more scared of them playing on a spinning track like Chennai, because most of these players are now grown up for playing in the in South Africa, England, the Sena countries. They're much better equipped. I'm not too sure that they play spin better than the 1990s 2000s crowd. I think the quality of spin bowling has definitely gone down.
Absolutely.
So they don't play great spinners in the Ranji Trophy. They definitely don't play any spinners of any repute in IPL. That they do play a very good pace bowler. So I think India is much more. I am more comfortable India playing people who bowl at like 150 or 145 than playing somebody like Dom Bess. I was a little scared of Dom Bess when he first came on to bowl because he was flighting the ball. I don't know why England lost. I definitely think he should have played the second test. When you have Dom Bess, why wouldn't you go with, like, how many overs did Chris Broad bowl? I mean, they could definitely have dropped Chris Broad and had played three spinners, and they could have Stokes opened the bowling if they needed two seamers. He's perfectly fine for bowling 5 overs in this pitch. So
and that's what he was doing. He hardly bowled, exactly. Yeah.
So he had. I'm more worried about those kinds of bowlers. So I'm very looking forward to Ahmedabad. I think it's fairly even Stevens. The only thing is the return of Anderson. I think Anderson has a very good record against India, especially against Kohli. I think Anderson knows and Kohli has this problem outside the off stump, and Anderson knows where to put it. And obviously, Anderson is kind of, I think of him as England's Venkatapati Raju. So, in England, he's virtually unplayable.
I've never heard that before, so I want to hear more.
In England, he's virtually unplayable. On some of the tracks, he's just virtually unplayable. He's just, but on the subcontinent, I'm not too sure that he is that effective, consistently effective. There are other players who I would consider, like, he doesn't have. So if I would compare, let's say, between Glenn McGrath and Anderson, I would always say India should always play Anderson, never Glenn McGrath, because Glenn McGrath was the kind of person who was also very good on Indian tracks.
Yes,
because he the main thing was he would be hitting the stumps. And if if you have variable bounce, which most Indian pitches ultimately on 4th and 5th day do have, at his level of accuracy and at the pace he bowled, which was about 132, 135, his accuracy and his ability to do just enough with the ball, not too much, he's dangerous on Indian pitches on 4th and 5th day. Somebody like Glenn McGrath. With Anderson, if the ball seems, yes, he's dangerous. If he gets a little bit of England-like conditions, growing up, we used to say this about Roger Binney, that Roger Binney on Indian pitches, he was fodder. But sometimes, and this happened once in a test match against Pakistan, we were playing in Eden Gardens. This is in the 80s. And somewhere around, and this was before now there's a lot of development, and so the wind doesn't come from the Ganga anymore like that.
Yep.
So around afternoon, around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, there used to be this wind which sometimes used to come from the Ganga. And that was when the ball started, suddenly in the afternoon, it started seeming like crazy. And this is exactly what happened to Pakistan. They were just batting, almost a dead Indian pitch. And then suddenly the balls, and they started losing wickets in a heap because Roger Binney was virtually unplayable for about half an hour or 40 minutes. As long as the wind was coming, he was virtually unplayable on that pitch. So leaving those small, extreme conditions, I'm really looking forward to see how India plays Jimmy. And he's the biggest threat.
Absolutely. And it's funny how we each have our distinct memories of Ahmedabad. You asked me Ahmedabad. I remember that 2008, that second test match against South Africa after they'd come from Chennai when Sehwag got that 300. And there was this red soil, and we were all there, and there were rumors of going around that Kumble and Dhoni weren't happy with the Dheeraj Parsana, the curator. It was red, and I remember all the shutterbugs were clicking pictures of Kumble. And Kumble, as it is a very intimidating man. But he was standing there, he was very stern, and we couldn't hear what he was saying, but his hands are moving. And as it turned out, the very first match, the first session, Steyn and Nitini bowled out India for 77, I recall. So that is like my memory of Ahmedabad. Of course, here I don't think that's going to happen. But I also agree with you, the fact that the spin, perhaps it's a myth, that India plays spin the best, because we've seen ample examples. Of course, some great off spinners and left arm spinners, some not so great spinners have also dismantled Indian attacks in the last 15 odd years. Arnab, one final question before I let you go. Nostalgia is obviously a big part of our cricket memories. If you could pick the 3 most memorable India test matches in India, because right now we're talking about India in India.
Okay, that's okay. So let me think, and of course I'll So first, of course, number one will obviously be, and I somehow seem to remember every ball of that series. So in a way, if I could give the most impulsive answer, it would be Test 1, Test 2, Test 3 of the Australia-India series in 2001.
I would probably say the same thing, so I get it.
Because Test 1, because of that innings which Adam Gilchrist played, it was an amazing innings and something which only he could play on that kind of. And Rishabh Pant sometimes reminds me of that Adam Gilchrist style of batting. So Adam Gilchrist normally used either scored a century or was out within the first 5 innings because it happened in the next Test match in Eden Gardens where he got out to Sachin Tendulkar. So he played like that, and even if you remember the way he got out to Sachin Tendulkar, it was a wild hoik which just hit his bat. So he used to bat like Rishabh Pant. There's a lot of similarity between the two, not just that they're left-handed. It's the same kind of audacious stroke play. It's good to have people like that. One person like that is good.
Unique, absolutely.
So I would say those 3 Test matches. But if you as a child growing up, another Test series which left an indelible mark on me is the 1983 series, which I referred to, which was between India and West Indies. Because India had just beat West Indies for the Prudential World Cup. So West Indies were coming to India. It was like a grudge fest for them. They decimated India in the one days. They just walked all over them, decimated them.
5-0 or something.
Yes. The Test matches, I think so that's the thing about the Test matches. The first Test match was at Kanpur. I remember that because the bat flew out of Gavaskar's hand.
Marshall, no?
Marshall. So the next day, the Bengali newspapers had a headline which likened that to Arjun losing his Gandhi bow. So when he dropped it, that's like he's ready to retire. So when that bat flew out of his hand, that was like, this is the time for Gavaskar to retire, when the bat flies out of your hand. Now, Gavaskar later in one of his books said that too much was made out of that because he was actually holding the bat very lightly just to make the ball fall down so that it doesn't go in. And so that's why it kind of twirled out of his hand. It wasn't that he'd lost control of the bat. It was supposed to be like that. And then what I remember was him coming back in the Delhi Test, playing. In those days, nobody in Test matches, even in one-day matches, nobody saw a bowler, 100 being scored of 90-something balls. This is impossible. And also Sunil Gavaskar. So this was surprising and he was hooking. He was hooking and he was hooking for a 6. Malcolm Marshall. This was, again, growing up as a little kid then. This was something which it was a shock. It's like the ending of Sixth Sense. It was almost like Gavaskar sees dead people at that point of time.
Someone spoiled it for me. The guy I'm sitting next to says, "Ye Bruce Willis bhoot hai." So I hate that movie. The same thing. So imagine that.
Then the 3rd Test was in Ahmedabad. The 4th Test was in Bombay, Mumbai. The 5th Test, I actually went to see the game at the ground and to watch Gavaskar bat, and I was putting a newspaper where I was going to sit, and when I turned back, Gavaskar was out because he lasted one delivery. He was out the first ball. That was, again, that was the first time I'd seen a cricket match at the ground, and I have the memories. So when we talked about home memories, I have the memories of things which you will never get when you watch it on the television. Like Malcolm Marshall, the difference between Malcolm Marshall bowling and Andy Robertson holding. So when holding's coming in, you actually don't hear it, because in Eden Gardens there's a lot of sound. But when the bowler comes in to bowl, it's like you could hear a pin drop. It was the 100,000 people in the ground absolutely silent, and India was, of course, playing terribly. And I was sitting in the where the pitch at square leg, really. So you don't get to see this, you don't understand this on television. But Anshuman Gaikwad, so Malcolm Marshall bowls to Anshuman Gaikwad. If you recall, Anshuman Gaikwad had a very high back, extremely high back. So Malcolm Marshall, you could hear his foot going when he came in. It was like an engine moving. like hands engine. It was like an engine cranking up the piston. And his pace would increase as if such a spectacular sight. And then he would bowl, and you would just see a red, like a kind of, you don't see the ball, you just see some red moving like this. And I remember Gaikwad's bat was still moving up, and his stump starts going like this, and his bat is still moving up. I remember because I could see that. I was at the exact right angle to see that.
Wow.
And that I've never forgotten. That the pace, and not just the pace, how clueless the batsman is. The batsman didn't even see the ball. And that game, and then I remember Kapil Dev coming in, and again, this was Calcutta. It was a kind of an overcast day. It was like ideal conditions for the West Indian pace bowlers. And Kapil Dev played an amazing innings. He just like, kind of a Rohit Sharma thing. He didn't care less what was going on. He played his own way. Everybody else was playing on a different pitch. He was playing on a different pitch. So, and then the sixth test at Chennai, when Gavaskar scored 236, he took Winston Davis had the bottle was thrown at Winston Davis, and Clive Floyd had walked out, and Gavaskar was batting at number 3. He didn't open, and he walked in at 3 wickets had gone down for 0 runs. So he was basically opening in that game also. So that's a series which I remember. I remember each thing vividly, and because that series was so amazing, even though we lost everything.
Yeah. Absolute pleasure talking to you and hearing these memories. I hope our viewers can also remember it, because we have recency bias, but also a lot of people don't remember things that happened more than 10 years ago. So to go back, 35 plus years ago into the 80s and to figure out, the nuances of the game, which, like we said, you can only get when you're at the ground. Arnab Ray, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you, and I will hold you to that topic of coming on my other channel and talking about movies, khaskar 80s and 90s. So
absolutely, Jamie, and thanks a lot for having me on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.